A radical overhaul of Britain's banks is announced to protect the taxpayers and stop them footing the bill for another crisis. Slavery laid bare. Police free 24 men who claimed they were kept captive by travellers and forced to work. And why giving children what they want might not be the best way to make them happy. Welcome to UK Report, looking at the major British stories over the past 7 days. The most radical and comprehensive overhaul of the British banking system in decades was outlined on Monday. High street banking will be ring-fenced from the more risky investment operation. Government hopes the proposals, which should come into effect over the next 8 years, will mean that taxpayers are never again asked to spend tens of billions of pounds bailing out bankers' mistakes. Simon Gompert has the details.
The tide has turned on banking. Never again should giant banks have to be rescued or propped up by the taxpayer. That's the point of today's recommendations. At the heart of the proposals is ring fencing. There'd be a firewall set up within a major bank, separating one subsidiary, including retail bank accounts and money transmission, from what some have called casino operations, more risky international and investment banking, so that if the riskier side gets into trouble, the retail side can be protected at much lower cost. Sir John Vickers, who led the commission, has made a concession to banks, saying they wouldn't have to have the new structure in place until the start of 2019.
This may seem a long time. It is. But short-termism got us into this mess, and we need long-termism to build a more stable system for the future.
The Commission says it has opted for a flexible ring fence, allowing banks to keep their dealings with big business within it, and they'll be able to move money across the fence as long as they keep capital worth 10% of their loans in reserve to cover losses. The Chancellor promised he would move quickly to put these proposals into law.
We have a commitment now to legislate, to get the rules in place while this government and this Parliament is sitting, and then it'll take some time for the full rules to come into effect. But that's what John Vickers himself recommends.
My suggestion to George Osborne today is ask John Vickers and the Commission to come back in 1 year's time and 2 years' time and do an independent report on progress. That's the way to make sure there's not foot dragging. We actually get on and implement this report.
Many bankers are arguing that the reforms could backfire, raising their costs, forcing them to push up their interest charges to customers, and so putting the UK's fragile recovery in jeopardy. And that's one reason why the Commission is giving them over 7 years to make the changes. Bailouts and rescues have created overpowerful mega banks like Lloyds, which includes Halifax and Bank of Scotland. So the Commission's other job was to beef up competition. It recommends that regulators should have a duty to promote competition, that customers should be able to switch current accounts between banks within 7 days, and it endorses a plan to force Lloyds to sell at least 600 branches to cut its market share.
We really shouldn't have to wait 7 years for the pro-customer part of this package to be introduced. Things like more competition on the high street, easier, faster switching. These are things that the government should get on with introducing now.
In the turmoil of the financial crisis, there were calls for giant banks to be broken up completely. These reforms fall short of that, but they still herald the biggest shake-up in banking for decades. Simon Gompert, BBC News.
The Home Office announced that Bernard Hogan-Howe would be appointed as the new Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police, or Britain's top policeman. He had been the acting Deputy Commissioner of Britain's largest force since Sir Paul Stephenson resigned as Commissioner in July over the phone hacking scandal. The Labour leader, Ed Miliband, angered some trade union members by criticising June's public sector strikes over pension reform. He was heckled at the TUC Congress in London when he warned that unions had to change or risk being sidelined. 3 of the biggest unions later announced that they'll be asking their members to vote for further strikes in November. A surge in the number of young people out of work contributed to the biggest rise in unemployment for 2 years. The jobless figure went up by 80,000 between May and July, taking the overall total to just over 2.5 million. The number of unemployed women now stands at its highest level since 1988. The Prime Minister defended the government's strategy in the face of Labour criticism. 2 men who claim they were in effect kept as slaves on a traveller site in Bedfordshire described their ordeal on Wednesday. The men had spent months at the Greenacres site, but they'd escaped before police raided it at the weekend and freed 24 men who were allegedly kept there. 5 people were charged with conspiring to hold people as slaves and forcing them to carry out work. Our correspondent Alison Holt spoke to some of the men.
Alongside the hustle and bustle of tourists and shoppers, people living rough on the streets can often be invisible. And according to one man who says he became a virtual slave at the Bedfordshire Travellers site, here it was all too easy for an alcoholic like him to be picked up. He says he's still too frightened to be identified.
If someone offers you 50 quid a day and as much booze as you want to drink, just for a bit of work, that's happy days. I mean, that's why it's just so easy for them to grab you and put you in the van. And once you're in there, they've got you.
That was 2008, before the current investigation. He claims once at the Greenacres site there was no money, his head was shaved, there was little food, and he lived crammed into a horse box.
As I was on the bottom bunk, I usually got kicked in the face to wake up. So you get up about 3 o'clock, hustle to get in the van. Everyone gets in the van, and we drove for, I would say, an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes, to the site where we were working at.
And what was the work like?
Hard. It was all block paving, breaking up driveways.
He eventually managed to escape and went straight to the police, but he says he was there for 8 months.
I think people stayed because of fear, because you saw what was going on right in front of your eyes. You saw that if someone tried to leave, you're going to get beaten up.
The police put him on a train back to his brother. He was shocked by what he saw.
He'd physically been beaten, clearly, numerous times. I mean, his bones and his ribs were all visible from where he hadn't eaten properly, hadn't had a diet. His teeth were black because he's had no nutrition.
Well, these are the sheds that we was definitely kept in.
It's a deeply shocking story that Adam knows only too well. In 2004, he says he too was held at Greenacres. He was promised good pay. Instead, he found squalor and what he now views as slavery.
I got moved out of a caravan into a shed that was sometimes locked, sometimes not, overnight. And it was literally, you were released for work in the morning. It's not your life. It's not your life at all. It's almost like you're incarcerated.
Both men have since turned their lives around, but say they are still haunted by their experiences at the site. Alison Holt, BBC News.
A 31-year-old UBS trader appeared in court, charged with fraud after the bank discovered it had lost $2 billion in unauthorised trades. Kwaku Adebolu was arrested in the early hours of Thursday morning. The losses at the bank's investment arm could now tip it into the red. Our business editor Robert Peston reports.
Kwaku Adebolu, a new entrant to the Bankers' Hall of Fame, or should that be Hall of Shame? The London-based trader of the giant US bank UBS is alleged to have racked up unauthorised losses of £1.3 billion. Hours after UBS uncovered the eye-watering loss, Mr Adebolu was arrested.
At 1 a.m. this morning, the City of London police were contacted by UBS about an allegation of fraud by one of their employees. And at 3:30 a.m, detectives from our force arrested the 31-year-old man on suspicion of fraud by abuse of position.
Here at UBS's sprawling network of offices in the heart of the City of London is where the alleged rogue trader worked. His colossal losses are likely to tip this giant bank back into loss for the latest 3-month period. But it's not the money, but the embarrassment that is likely to prove most painful, because this is a bank that after the great crash of 2008 claimed it was taking much, much less risk. UBS was among the bank's worst the last banking crisis, incurring losses of more than £35 billion. Bailed out by the Swiss government, it changed its management and the way it does business. So what went wrong?
You can put in these technological systems that limit how much people can trade, but in the end the problem is if you're employing intelligent people and they want to get round these systems, there is a chance they will find a way. That is why what's needed is a moral compass from the top of the organisation, so people know what's right, know what's wrong, and they don't even think of doing these sort of things in the first place.
So if it turns out that Kwaku Adeboli is a big-time rogue trader, how would his loss of £1.3 billion rank against other rogue traders? Well, the biggest loss ever, £4.3 billion, was racked up in 2008 by the French dealer Jérôme Kerviel at Société Générale. That's rather more than the £827 million loss of Britain's most famous rogue trader, Nick Leeson, who destroyed the venerable merchant bank Barings. This advert is how UBS likes to see itself, a virtuoso in the global world of banking. It's been humiliated by the alleged attempt to forge a solo career by one of its bankers. Robert Peston, BBC News.
A rescue operation was launched for 4 Welsh miners trapped underground by rising water at the Glacian Colliery in the Swansea Valley. By Friday evening, all 4 bodies had been found. While the rescuers searched for the men, the miners' families had been waiting for news in the local community centre.
The rescue team said they'd never met such difficult conditions, but they worked day and night in the hope of finding at least one miner still left alive. This evening, though, their hopes were finally dashed.
I can confirm that the 4th dead miner has now been recovered from the Glacian mine. And on behalf of us all, I would like to express our deepest and most sincere condolences to the families of Philip Hill, David Powell, Gary Jenkins and Charles Breslin.
I can confirm that of the 4 deceased miners were found in close proximity to each other. One was on the exit side of the blockage, as we know, and the 3 have been recovered this afternoon. Were all found together in the area where they had been working.
This has been a stab right through the heart of these local communities. There's a long tradition of mining here, but nobody expected the tragedies that have happened in past generations would come today.
Families, friends and neighbours suffered an agonising wait for information in the community centre. But over the course of the day, the news just got worse, as one by one the rescue teams found all 4 bodies. There were messages of support from around the country and around the world, gifts of food and toys for the children, but this has been a crippling blow. The operation had been hampered by the silt and debris carried by the flood, which blocked the tunnels where the 4 men died. There will be an inquiry into this tragedy, and politicians from all sides said their thoughts tonight were with the community. Mining has long been at the heart of life in these valleys, but now the questions will begin about the risks these miners faced and whether their deaths could have been prevented. Richard Lister, BBC News.
British children are among the least happy in the developed world. That, according to the charity UNICEF UK. The reason for this is a lack of contact with their parents and too much emphasis on material gain. UNICEF published its initial findings 4 years ago. It's since investigated the prime causes of children's unhappiness. Our home editor, Mark Easton, has been looking at the findings.
Mariana is 7 1/4, and like most little girls of her age, her world is filled with pink plastic. Our culture of materialism shapes the play and the lives of our children. But according to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, in Britain it distorts the relationship parents have with their kids.
Obviously, for her, a trip to toy shops is a big thing. And she'd be like, I want that, I want that. Oh, mummy, I want that one too. And I'm like, no.
The UNICEF research suggests that British parents want to be good parents, but they're not sure how. They find they're often too busy or simply too exhausted to engage with their children, and so they compensate by buying them toys and gadgets and clothes.
Can you see my shoes? No. But I wanted them.
Lenora took part in the UNICEF project, which painted a picture of British life in which parents trade quality time with their children for the money to buy cupboards full of expensive toys. Although she's always strived to make time to play with her daughter, the project made her reevaluate her own priorities.
There were times where I was chatting to friends or my mother, what have you, and saying I feel so guilty that I don't actually have the time to spend with my daughter. And that was one big issue for me. I felt awful. I don't feel so bad now.
The research team compared British parents with their counterparts in Sweden and Spain and found, in their words, a stark contrast. In other European countries, family time is given greater importance.
We need to really support families who are under so much pressure. In Sweden, for example, they try to protect families against the commercial pressures by having a ban on advertising aimed at children under 12 years old. We could consider doing something like that.
4 years ago, UNICEF sparked national soul-searching with analysis showing child well-being in the UK at the bottom of the League of Developed Nations. This year, they recruited 14-year-old Vanessa to an international panel of young people in the hope of understanding why British children's happiness lags behind.
If you get what your children want, that's great, but also if you spend more time with them, that's great as well, because you've got to make a child emotionally happy as well as physically happy as well, if that makes any sense.
For Lenora and Mariana, happiness is playing together with toys they've made themselves from old cardboard boxes. But today's UNICEF report says that for many parents, such simple pleasures prove too difficult. Our children want our time, but instead we buy them things. Mark Easton, BBC News.
That's all from us at UK Report. Join us again the same time next week. From me, Adam Parsons, it's goodbye for now.